Good afternoon, and welcome to the University of Montana's Montana Theater for this debate between Montana's two major gubernatorial candidates. Thanks for coming on such a beautiful day, and thanks for listening if you're tuning into KUFM. I'm Mike McInally, editor of the Missoulian. I'm the moderator of today's debate, and here's the format. Our panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment, will take turns asking questions to our candidates. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each question, and then each candidate will have 30 seconds for additional comments. Each candidate will take turns answering first. Now, at the end of the questions from the panel, each candidate will have 90 seconds for a closing remark. We'll flip another coin right before we go into those closing remarks to decide who speaks first for those final thoughts. On our panel today, starting at the back of the stage is Dick King, here representing the Montana Association of Economic Developers. Next to him is Gail Price. She is president of the Associated Students of the University of Montana. On the far end, I need to skip over the next panelist, is Chuck Johnson. He is the chief of bureau for the Lee Newspaper's State Bureau in Helena. And sitting between Gail and Chuck is Jerry Brown, Dean of the University of Montana's School of Journalism. Dean Brown has asked me to say at this point that he is not related to Bob Brown. Although I think when you hear Dean Brown ask his first question, any thoughts that you might have had along those lines will be disabused. We had a coin flip backstage to determine who got the first question. Mr. Schweitzer won that coin flip. Mr. Brown, his opponent, will answer second. Jerry, your question.
Mr. Schweitzer and Mr. Brown, if you can't understand my accent, will you ask Mike to translate this question? It's homecoming, so it seems an appropriate time for us to talk about homecoming and what homecoming has meant to many alumni. They're returning here to express their gratitude for a public university education. Yet it seems to me, of course from my perspective as dean, that the state is, the value that the state places on public education appears to be steadily diminishing. Dollar figures have increased for the Montana University system over a 10-year period, but appropriations from the state general fund have dropped at least 15%. All this while operating costs have increased and faculty and staff salaries remain well below national averages. My question to you gentlemen is, what values do you place on higher education personally? And what values do you think the state of Montana should place on higher education? And if you do hold higher education in some value, how will you act to shore it up and support it?
Thank you very much. And I put a great deal of value on higher education. And during the last 12 years, the legislature, the ones who have been running the legislature, have shirked their duty. Because during the last 12 years, we've gone from the state of Montana paying 2/3 of the cost of tuition at our higher educations to 1/3. So you see, we've flipped the balance. But more significantly, during the last dozen years, it used to cost a dozen years ago 6% of the per capita income for a working family in Montana. The average income in Montana was 6% for tuition. Today it is 16%. Now, my father and mother are here, Nancy's here. We met over at Montana State University. That's where the boo comes. But I mention this because my father and mother are children of homesteaders on the High Line. Neither of them even graduated from high school. But they had a dream. And that dream was to send their kids to university. And thank you for pushing us along. Thank you for the sacrifice. And thank the state of Montana for helping them. And they sent 6 kids to university. But this legislature has begun to steal that dream from families all over Montana. So we have a plan. We've got a plan to invest in higher education. We're spending $120 million today, and $150 million is coming for research and development grants to just 2 of our major universities. So we've got to recommit ourselves to higher education. We are last place in the country in wages, last place in the percent of our population with technology jobs, and we can do better. The best educated workforce is the best paid workforce.
Mr. Brown.
Well, I headed up the 6 mil levy campaign here in 1998, and some of you may be familiar with that. Some of the younger people not be. But what we do is on a decadal basis, every 10 years, we go to the people and ask them to renew their support for the 6 mil levy on property, a property levy to support higher education. It goes back to 1928. And it was a wonderful opportunity because I got to spend a lot of time back on the University of Montana campus, and I'm a life member of the Alumni Association here, and also at the Montana State University campus in Bozeman. And I learned a lot about the wonderful things that happen in higher education in our state. And then I was able to go out on the road and talk to service clubs and groups and organizations around the state and talk about the enormous value of public education. And it's an incredible value. We've got a limited amount of time for our questions and answers, but one of the things that I was able to say was that in the 1940s, the average yield of dryland wheat in Montana was about 20 bushel to the acre, and today it approaches 40 bushel to the acre. And that was the result of university-level research, because climatic conditions are substantially the same now as they were then. I'm the first member of my family to have graduated from college, and it's a wonderful opportunity. And I want more people to have it, and it's a shame when people can't afford university educations. The most recent legislative sessions haven't been able to appropriate as much money as I'm sure they wish they could for higher education. The legislature can only give what it's first taken away. So it's not the legislature's fault necessarily when money isn't appropriated for various public purposes. Sometimes the state's economy is such that it can't carry higher appropriations.
That's time, Mr. Brown, I'm sorry. Mr. Schweitzer, Mr. Schweitzer, 30 seconds.
I think I just heard that the legislature sometimes can't do anything about this. I suppose if I had been in the legislature during the last 30 years and watched while our per capita wages went 50th in the nation, last place in the percent of technology jobs, highest tuition in America for our colleges of technology, and I'd been in the legislature for the last 30 years, I would say the legislature can do nothing about it, but the legislature can. The legislature is responsible for creating the tax laws, the regulatory environment in Montana that is going to create the opportunities for investment in Montana.
That's time. Mr. Brown, 30 seconds.
Well, I just was sorry for not watching the clock more closely, but the legislature has to prioritize. It's a difficult job, and members of the legislature, both Democrats and Republicans, both in the House and Senate, have to work out a budget that's balanced at the end of the 90-day legislative session. And they have to prioritize in the process of doing that. And I'm sure most legislators in both parties would have preferred to be able to appropriate more money for the university system than they did. It's just that things didn't work out that way. If you've read the newspaper, you'll see that the Montana economy is moving in a positive direction now. We've got a projected budget surplus at the end of the biennium that looks really positive, so maybe some things can happen.
All right, time. Our second question comes from Gail Price of ASUM, and it goes to Mr. Brown first.
All right. Mr. Schweitzer mentioned the statistic that the state 10 years ago paid 2/3 of the higher education, but now only pays 1/3. Dramatic tuition increases have since made up the difference. As governor, how would each of you ensure Montana students will be able to afford higher education?
Well, I think you can't cut your way to prosperity, but you can't tax your way to prosperity either. We've got a growing economy now. We've got an economy that the economic indicators show is pointed in a positive direction. In fact, unemployment figures for the month of August, the most recent figures that I've seen, show that unemployment in Montana is at 3.9%, which is the best for a month of August, as I understand it, going back to 1973. And our income, depending on how you calculate it, I guess in a simple way to understand it is our household income is growing rapidly in Montana, perhaps the second fastest in the nation, perhaps only second to Washington State. So we're making some real economic progress, and the best proof of that is the general fund surplus. You probably saw a news story today that indicates it's $278 million. That can be a little illusory because a fair amount of that is one-time money. And so you can't project for certain how much of that will be available in the future for worthwhile public programs. But certainly it's important that we do a more adequate job of funding our educational system. It's important that we not price students who are qualified and should be members of the university system to be able to attend our excellent units of higher education in Montana. And as our economy grows, we're going to be able to make these opportunities more available to more people.
Mr. Schweitzer.
I think the question is what I would do as governor, something obviously different than the legislature's done for the last 12 years. Specifically, we're going to grow Montana's economy. As I said before, we are 50th in wages, last place. But there's some significant things that the governor of Montana can. First and foremost, I am going to commit, as governor, during 4 years to raise $10 million from private industry across Montana for scholarships and endowments for all of our universities, colleges of technologies, tribal colleges, and community colleges, and I'll challenge every governor that follows me to do the same. Number two, we have proposed a tax credit because those of you who are students here, you probably don't know this, but the state of Montana invested about $45,000 or $50,000 in you K through 12. That was a heck of an investment we made in you. And now the state of Montana is investing another $20,000 in you during this education process. So then, $65,000 worth of education expenditures, and half of you that graduate from this university will leave this state to find prosperity someplace else within 3 years. So we're going to offer you a deal. If you'll stay in Montana, if you'll stick it out while we grow this economy, during the first 5 years while you're paying back those college loans, we'll make those 100% tax deductible in your Montana taxes. We're also going to reach out to private industry and ask them to be part of the curriculum at our higher institutions, and we would ask that when we graduate people that go to work for them, that they would give those institutions of higher learning 1/3 of the cost of your tuition while you were here.
That's time. Mr. Brown, 30 seconds.
Gosh, thank you. I hadn't even spoken yet. I don't disagree with what Brian says when he talks about his tax credit idea. That's probably not a bit, but we've got to be able to afford to do it. And it isn't anything I would necessarily be opposed to doing as governor either. It was his idea, and I'll grant him that, and it could be a good one, provided we can afford to do it. But I think that's what we have to recognize. Remember, we talked before about how our economy is growing. We've got a general fund budget surplus for the first time in several years, and the economic indicators are pointing in a positive direction. So we want that economy to continue to grow. But in real dollars, and real ongoing sustainable dollars, the money that the next governor will have to use for worthwhile public purposes is closer to $90 million. It's a heck of a lot of money, but it's not the world.
30 seconds.
Well, I think if we go asking us what our plan was for higher education, I think that what I described was a plan. And then what I've heard from this side is an apology. I think we need to look to the future. It's time for us to look to the future and decide whether we're going to be an economy that invests in higher education and creates technology jobs, or we're going to be looking in the rearview mirror.
Our next question comes from Dick King of the Montana Economic Developers Association. It goes first to Mr. Schweitzer.
Thank you, Mike. Currently, state government spending for marketing Montana to attract new companies. We do compete with other states that aggressively recruit businesses. How would you, as governor, approach the marketing of Montana and business recruitment, and how much funding do you think is needed to do the job right?
Well, I think I'd take a lead from the folks in the hospitality business. Some years ago, Thelma, the hotel owners got together across Montana and said, we are going to place a levy on those beds that we rent out to people that come here, and we're going to use that money, 100% of that money, we're going to use for travel promotion. And today, those 10 million people that visit Montana, that is the best payoff you can imagine. Travel promotion has paid itself off. For every dollar spent is $197 in return. When our organizations across Montana, the Montana Economic Development folks, travel to trade shows, when they travel to New York or New Jersey or Los Angeles, and they set up booths and trying to promote Montana, they go there with almost no resources. The states that have been successful in attracting investment, and we'll tell you about them, Kentucky, North Carolina, Utah, New Mexico, they have put dollars behind their trade missions. They've gone to these meetings with more than just a few pie charts. They've gone to those meetings with overlays. They have information about their economies. They have groups of people who are able to answer medical questions, education questions, commerce questions, DEQ questions, DNRC questions. They're able to promote their states, and they're bringing investment to their states. We need a governor who understands this. I am committed as governor to put dollars in business promotion, and secondly, as governor, I'll bring my experience in private industry to work as a deal closer the way the successful governors have been across this country. When you have a group of people that are trying to get investment in their community, there is nothing more powerful than getting your governor to come with you to close that deal, to walk into that boardroom and say, what do you need to bring that investment to Montana? What is it that we need to provide for you? What is it that we can do for you to make this an easier transition?
Okay.
That's the kind of governors that are successful. That's the kind that I'll be.
Mr. Brown, 90 seconds.
We created an Office of Economic Development and an Officer of Economic Development in state government here several years ago, and he's done a good job. But his office has been woefully underfunded. And I think your question was specific to how much we'd reappropriate. It would be a goal of mine and a priority that we would at least fund him at the level that he was intended to be funded at the beginning of this biennium, which means about $310,000 more than he has. And I don't know if that's enough, because I think that it's extremely important to reach out. We've got a wonderful state. We've got wonderful things to market here. And Montana has some real opportunities as we look into the future. And we need to take advantage of them, and we can do that significantly by promoting Montana, because we've got a lot to promote. And so if we have a better funded Office of Economic Opportunity, we're in a better position to take advantage of opportunities, business opportunities for Montana, to add value to the things that we produce here and to market them in other states and to promote Montana in other states. I have traveled some in my life to other states and even to foreign countries. And in the process of doing that, I know that sometimes the person-to-person contact can be vitally important. And, well, the governor's primary responsibility is to be the governor and to be the chief administrative officer of the state. It is also possible for the governor to be a trade ambassador for the state, and that would be an important responsibility that I would consider important as governor.
Mr. Schweitzer, 30 seconds.
That would be something that's been lacking in the state for at least 20 years. A governor who understands their role as a promoter of business and attracting business to this state. The governors that we've had over the last 20 years haven't recognized that as an important function of what they do. This governor recognizes it is one of the most important functions of a successful governor.
Mr. Brown.
Well, the governor 20 years ago was Ted Schwinden, and he was the governor that established our trade relationship with Japan, with Kumamoto, cemented our sister state relationship with Kumamoto in Japan, and also established a trade office on Taipei, in the city of Taipei. And so he was greatly interested in foreign trade and traveled extensively in order to bring that about. And I think other governors have done the same thing to the extent they've been able to. But you have to remember that the office of governor is a demanding job, and governors aren't expected to travel extensively, but they should travel enough to promote our state.
Okay,
and certainly I would do that.
Our next question comes from Charles Johnson of the Lee Newspaper State Bureau, and it goes first to Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown, Republicans have held the governor's office since 1989. They've controlled the House and the Senate of the legislature since 1995. Through this period, we've seen support for public schools and the university system decline, environmental laws weakened, tax breaks given to businesses and not homeowners, and electric utility deregulation passed. Why should Montana voters trust Republicans with 4 more years? And how do you differ than your predecessors?
Well, let me say at the outset, when we talk about the economic fortunes of our state, that they don't correspond to the political parties in power necessarily. And to illustrate that, I'd point out that we were 34th in the nation in terms of our per capita income in 1980. During a long period of Democratic dominance. And that continued for another 8 years, and we declined from 34th to 44th by the end of that decade. Now, I knew Governor Schwinden well. He was governor during that period of time, and I think he was a solid and competent man. And I'm not blaming him or the Democratic majorities in the legislatures that occurred for most of that period of time, or at least some of that period of time, for the reversals that took place in the state then. Sometimes there are economic factors beyond the control of politics and politicians that can cause a state's economic fortunes to ebb and flow. I would say this, though, just as a matter of economic principle, I think the best economic policy is a policy of low taxation and the minimal amount of regulation so the private sector economy can grow and expand. And that's what I would try to bring about. That's the kind of leadership that I would try to foster as governor. I think that rather than looking for more taxes, we should look for more taxpayers. And I think if we do that, we can move Montana in a positive direction, and we can do so without sacrificing our environment. We can do a good job of supporting our schools, and we're moving in a good direction now.
Mr. Schweitzer.
There appears to be some inconsistencies, because while we hear today that a low tax and regulatory environment will attract business to Montana, it was none other than my opponent who voted 73 times to raise taxes. There seems to be some inconsistencies, because in 1991, when Governor Stan Stevens offered his Big Sky dividend plan, which was a plan that would have busted the trust, which would have diverted money flowing into the trust, my opponent voted against that in 1991. And in fact, the people of Montana were offered an opportunity to vote on that in a referendum. They also voted against it. But today, in 2004, my opponent has dusted that plan off and offered exactly the same plan that he voted against in 1991. In 1995, my opponent decided that we don't even need an Office of Secretary of State and voted to abolish it. But just a short 4 years later, ran for the Office of Secretary of State. So you see, there are inconsistencies. There are inconsistencies. And the issue about blaming one party or another party has got to stop. You heard this, well, it wasn't actually our fault, it was their fault. Look, we're looking to the future. The people of Montana deserve better. 50th in wages, 50th in the percent of our population with technology jobs. We need a governor who will work with both sides, and that's why I've selected a Republican to work with me on both sides of the aisle to bring these legislators together and stop this kind of blame game.
Mr. Brown.
You know, Brian criticizes my record, but he has none. He's never held an important position of responsibility, and he's never been faced with having to vote for or against a tax cut. So we don't know what his philosophy would be in those regards. And he criticizes me for not supporting the Big Sky dividend program back 12 or 14 years ago. Well, then the coal trust was still filling up. It was my opinion and the opinion of many other legislators that it ought to get to at least $500 million before we capped it. And in addition, it was earning more income by its investments then than it is now. So now it makes sense, I think, to cap the coal trust and use the money for infrastructure development, such as perhaps improving buildings here on this campus.
Okay, time, Mr. Schweitzer.
Well, I guess experience doesn't count for people who haven't been legislators, because my experience has not been in the legislature. I've been in the private business world. I've been writing this front side of paychecks. I've been borrowing money from banks and paying it back. I've been using my initiative and my ingenious to try and put those two pieces together and pray and hope and work hard to try and grow a business. That's what most of Montana does. And apparently those who have served in the legislature say that kind of experience doesn't matter. I didn't hear him say that when Ronald Reagan, who had never been in state government, ran for governor, or George Bush, who ran for governor of Texas, never having served, or for that matter, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who came from the party.
Our next question comes from Gail Price of ASUM. It goes first to Mr. Schweitzer.
Mr. Schweitzer, roughly 16% of Montanans do not have health insurance coverage, and the affordability of health insurance greatly affects the choices that students make after college. Both you and Mr. Brown have signed pledges committing to make access to affordable health insurance for young Montanans a priority if elected. How do each of you plan to accomplish this?
Well, to start with, we need to fully fund the CHIP program, and that's a program that is more than 4 to 1 with matching funds from the federal government for everyone who's less than 18. In addition to that, we have a plan, because I don't think it's actually 16% of Montana, unless you were talking about 16% of the youth. 20% of Montana doesn't have health insurance. So we have a plan. Today, you still are getting health care, although it is at the emergency room if you don't have health insurance, and that's the most expensive kind of health care. Families all over Montana, if they can't afford health insurance, when there's a sick person in the family, they're going to the emergency room. And in Montana, even though healthcare is the largest business in Montana, they're providing that service even if you don't have insurance. We have a plan because what's happening is we're shifting. We have those people who come after the ones who ended up in the emergency room who do have health insurance. Since the ones who didn't have health insurance can't pay their bill, the cost is shifted to the next ones in who do have health insurance. So we have some of the highest cost health insurance, some of the most rapidly increasing costs of health insurance of any place in the country. We are a state of small business. We have a plan, those small business owners who aren't able to find competitive insurance markets because they don't have enough people in their pool, we're going to help small businesses and individuals from across Montana pool together so they have negotiating clout of 5,000 or 10,000 people in the group so they can be competitive with corporate America who are able to buy insurance at lower prices. More people insured, fewer people are shifting their costs, and the cost of health care will come down for everybody in Montana.
Mr. Brown.
We've got an aging population in Montana, and that's a factor to some extent of a struggling economy. If we have an expanding economy, if we create more jobs and opportunity for jobs in Montana, then the grandchildren and children of Montanans will be able to stay here and return to here. And that will help our economy generally, and it will help our healthcare situation generally. It's been mentioned that the CHIP program is a good program. You know, I took a bit of a political chance here about 6 months ago when I recommended that we more fully fund the CHIP program because it's an excellent idea of working through the private sector in a way that can help to insure children who don't have health insurance. And it's something that we now, I think, are in a position to more fully fund, and it would be a priority of mine to do that. I think we can get at least another 5,000 needy children insured through the CHIP program, and I'll make it a goal to do that. It's always been possible for people to gather together through groups and organizations if they choose, or to form their own groups and organizations in order to obtain insurance for themselves. This is something that we can continue to look at and probably need to do in Montana and in other states if we're going to improve our health insurance situation. But we should also recognize that Montana is not unique. And this is a problem that's nationwide. We have a different approach to it in our country than they have in many other countries. Most other countries have single-payer health insurance systems. We don't. We're still making free enterprise work in our country, and it's my opinion that we should, but we should work hard to improve the system that we have.
Mr. Schweitzer, 30 seconds.
The most rapidly increasing cost of health care is still prescription drugs. It's increasing at 18%, as much as 20% per year. So we have a plan to allow pharmacies in Montana to re-import medicine from Canada. We're going to allow pharmacies in Montana to re-import medicine from Canada. The United States Congress has decided that medicine is every bit as safe in Canada as it is in America. It is time to allow that border to be open. I will continue to be an advocate to Congress, and we will get a plan that will allow Montana to re-import medicine and not force people to go to mail order.
Mr. Brown, 30 seconds.
Some of you may recall that my opponent ran for the U.S. Senate in the year 2000, and that issue was his flagship issue during that election campaign. And then he was running for an office, a national office, a federal office, where he would have been in a position to make the changes that he feels are necessary in order to re-import the drugs from Canada. Now he's running for governor of Montana. It's a very different office. And it was a good horse for him to ride then, but it's really not a relevant issue now because it's against the law to do what he's proposing. Some governors are suggesting that their people should do that, but they're leading in the direction of lawlessness. I'm hopeful that Congress will work something out, and I would be in a position to go back to Congress and perhaps advocate it. But I think to say that you're going to bring drugs in from Canada when it's against the law is bad leadership and bad public policy.
That's time, Mr. Brown. Our next question comes from Dick King of the Montana Economic Developers Association. It goes first to Mr. Brown.
Gentlemen, Montana seems to be divided into two separate states. Large areas of our state are experiencing long-term economic decline and population loss. Other areas are pockets of prosperity and struggle with growth problems. How would you address these conflicting trends in terms of the state's economic development efforts?
Great question. We are a big and diverse state, a wonderful state, but our diversity sometimes makes governance in Montana a difficult puzzle. And I'm familiar with the interesting work of Dr. Larry Swanson, who is a member of your faculty here, and who's identified certain places in Montana, certain economic hotspots in Montana. And if you look at a map of Montana, basically the area that's more or less north of Billings and east of Great Falls is the part of Montana that's not growing and prospering. But some of the valleys, such as this one, and well, the Flathead Valley, the Gallatin Valley, the Bitterroot Valley, the area around Billings, and some other economic hotspots in the area are places where economic development is taking place, and sometimes rapidly. So here we've got a situation where a large part of Montana is trying to prime the economic pump, and we've got other parts of Montana that's trying to drink out of the economic fire hose. And we're trying to tailor an intelligent policy that helps both. Actually, the folks where the economy is stagnant have a greater difficulty than the folks who live in the parts of the state where it's moving. So those of us here are in a better situation. I think we need to look to natural resources. We need to always remember the great importance of agriculture. We need to recognize that we've got a wonderful coal resource. We've got the potential for wind. We've got the potential for biofuels. And I think there'll be greater demand for these things as we look in the future, and I think they all offer important opportunities for folks in the parts of Montana where the economy is not growing rapidly.
Mr. Schweitzer.
George Bernard Shaw said that if you were to lay all the world's economists toe to head, they would not completely reach a conclusion. I watched Dr. Paulson make a presentation last week that said the economy in Montana is great. It's great. He showed all these charts and graphs that said we're in great shape. Well, only an economist could stand with one foot in boiling water and the other in a bag of ice and say, oh, things are about average. Look, it is true. North of Billings, east of Great Falls, has been left behind. And I'll tell you why they've been left behind. Because every state and province that surrounds Montana, every state and province that surrounds Montana has had the kind of leadership that it takes to create value-added agriculture. Every state and province that surrounds Montana has built ethanol plants and added billions of dollars to their local economies. Every state but Montana and its failed leadership. Let's talk about wind power. All the states around Montana have invested in wind power. 240 megawatts in Washington, 250 in Oregon, 285 in Wyoming, over 100 in the Dakotas, 500 plus in Minnesota, more in Iowa. And in Montana, from east to west, north to south, the leadership we've had over the last dozen years, we still do not have 1 full megawatt of power. It's going to take some leadership that understands, in addition to growing the technology economies of the growing economies that we have here in technology and in universities and in commerce, we've got to invest in eastern Montana, in coal, in wind, and in ethanol. We've had failed leadership. It's time for someone who understands an agrarian economy.
Mr. Brown.
An agreement was just signed in my office here about a week ago to make available a section of state land in the Judith Gap area for wind generation. And this is an exciting prospect and something that I've been interested in since I became Secretary of State. The business reversals of the Northwestern Corporation, I think, blighted some opportunities that we might have had in Montana to expand wind generation in our state, but we're in the process of moving in that direction now, just as with so many other things in our state economy. You know, Brian is so fond of trying to cast the worst possible pale on almost everything that happens here. He blames Paul Polson, he blames the legislature, he blames the governors. I don't know, he'll probably even blame the breakup of the Beatles on the Republican majority in the legislature.
That's
I don't know
time,
for sure
Mr.
where he's
Brown.
going.
Mr. Schweitzer.
Well, actually, from the beginning of this conversation that we've had here today, you haven't heard me say one time one party or the other party. This is not about blame. This is about establishing who we are and where we're going. If we don't understand our economy, there's very little chance that we can improve. If we continue to say, we're turning the corner, we're in great shape, we are last place in wages, but we're still ahead of Guam, so the corner is turning.
That's time. Our next question comes from Chuck Johnson of the Lee newspapers, and it goes first to Mr. Schweitzer.
Mr. Schweitzer, For nearly 2 decades, those groups that want to see major increases in state spending for public education, colleges and universities, state employees' pay, state agency budgets have been stymied. You've received the endorsements from state employee unions, teachers unions, and other groups with their eye on the state treasury. How will you be able to say no to the very groups who are helping work in your election?
We're going to be very clear that we have plans to grow Montana's economy. This concept of saying that enough that we're in last place is not good enough. I've suggested to you that we have firm economic development plans to grow Montana's technology, to grow Montana's value added. We can be making fertilizer with our natural gas. We can add value to our timber resources in the furniture business. We can continue to create light manufacturing, but in order to do that, we've got to have industry ready, willing, and able to help our colleges of technologies, our tribal colleges, and our universities churn out quality people. So that's why I've suggested we can't turn this around tomorrow. We are last place in wages. Yes, our teachers are last place in wages. It is clear that we have to pay our teachers more, as it is clear that we have to pay all of the people in Montana more, because if we don't, the best and brightest will continue to leave this state at an unprecedented rate. So I'm going to say to them, trust us, work with us, we'll grow the economy, and we'll find fair wages for you. It's the same thing that I've said to the young people here. Stick it out with us. We're going to make this a better state.
All right. Mr. Brown.
Excuse me, I think the question was of the groups and organizations that endorsed Mr. Schweitzer. I don't know exactly how to comment on that. I can say that we're all Montanans, whether we're public sector people or private sector people, and we want our private sector people to be able to prosper. And to the extent that the private sector economy moves forward, it makes it possible for the public sector economy to succeed as well. If we overburden our private sector with taxes and regulations, then we're going to handicap it so that it can't survive and prosper, and in the long run, we're going to hurt the public sector economy as well. And so we need to follow a policy that bears that in mind. There are public unions, public teachers unions, and public employees unions, and so on, that have a direct stake in government spending, and certainly they want higher benefits and they want higher pay. And I would just say that I think we ought to take as good a care of them as well as we possibly can, recognizing that the economy shouldn't grow faster, or that the public spending certainly shouldn't grow faster than anything that the economy can sustain. And I would repeat to you, in spite of what my opponent would have you believe, that our economy is moving very positively in the right direction in our state. And a perfect example of that is that we're talking about how we can compensate public employees. Now there's a real possibility to compensate them at least some better, because our economy is moving in a positive direction. That's due to low tax and high growth policies that have been placed into effect here in recent years.
Mr. Schweitzer.
I've been in all 56 counties listening to folks. And for those of you who have been in Helena, you may not be hearing those voices. I heard that our unemployment is low, for example, 3.9%. Well, I don't hear from people across Montana that employment is a problem. Many of the people I speak to have 2 jobs. It's not unemployment that's the problem, it's wages. We're last place in wages. We have got to attract technology investment to this state. We've got to grow Montana's economy. We cannot continue to look in the rearview mirror.
Mr. Brown.
Well, the good-paying jobs, the jobs that pay high wages, are frequently jobs in the industrial areas. They're mining jobs, they're timber industry jobs, they're manufacturing jobs, the kinds of jobs that frequently involve the development of natural resources. And so we've got to recognize that we need to have a balance in our state. We want to protect the environment, but we don't want to protect the environment to the extent that we foreclose on any job opportunity, whether it's a timber opportunity or a mining opportunity or a manufacturing opportunity. Those are the kinds of jobs that will build Montana's economy. Those are the kinds of jobs that will build Montana's economy, give more strength to our economy so that we'll have more opportunities for our people here.
Okay. Our next question. Next question comes from Jerry Brown of the School of Journalism. Goes first to Mr. Brown.
Before I ask this question, I want to make certain that both of you are swords length apart. because I want to raise the issue of negative campaigning, or what some people might call mudslinging. I think those of us who work this side of the street know that the public's hypocritical about negative campaigning or mudslinging. We appear not to like it, but we do. It's often, smart politicians have known from time out of memory that it's more fun and more appealing and more effective probably than those land-positive ads. Mr. Brown, you're calling Mr. Schweitzer a double talker in your advertising. Mr. Schweitzer's responding by saying, you're a liar for calling him a double talker. I want to ask you first, do you have any ethical queasiness or any reservations? Do you think that negative ads distort, obscure, mislead the public away from key issues?
You know, once Senator Alan Simpson in Wyoming was asked a question similar to that, and he said, if you don't like partisan bickering, move to a country where it's not allowed. You know, the great freedom of our First Amendment allows free and open political discourse where government doesn't control the discourse. And we need to be careful that what we say is not unfair. We need to be careful that what we say is not wrong, but there's got to be a clear difference and a distinction in terms of the issues. Now, my opponent doesn't accept any political action committee money in his race for governor. Well, he accepted something like $250,000 of it when he ran for the U.S. Senate just 4 years ago. And that seems inconsistent to me. I don't know why it was right for him to do that then and why it isn't right for him to do that now. He's criticized the tax cuts that the legislature placed in effect here a couple of years ago in a news report in the Livingston Enterprise here a few months ago. And then more recently has said, well, he favors keeping them in effect. He says he opposes the sales tax. And then he also says, but everything's still on the table. I'm not saying the sales tax isn't on the table, but I oppose it. And I'm not sure what he means by that. He says he's opposed to same-sex marriage and that he's going to vote for the ballot issue that would prohibit it in Montana. But at the same time, he says he's not opposed to it, or he's not in favor of the amendment on the national level that would prohibit same-sex marriage. And maybe there's an important distinction there. I don't know. But I think when he makes contradictions, since he has no record, at least his rhetoric ought to be consistent, and I'll call him on it when he has it coming.
Mr. Schweitzer.
Mr. Brown was involved in one of the nastiest Republican, I finally have said one of the party's names, but in his party, one of the nastiest primaries in the history of this state. And that's why the week after the primary, I asked him to sign a clean campaign pledge along with me. I thought that he probably had his fill of running negative ads and having negative ads run against him. Since that time, this campaign has been all negative, all the time. If you watch your television set tonight, you will see that I have all positive ads, and you'll see that he and his pals are running nothing but negative ads. The state of Montana deserves better. This ought to be a discussion about who has ideas for lowering the cost of health care, who has ideas for creating higher paid jobs and better jobs, who has ideas for investing in higher education in K through 12, who has ideas of bringing Montana together to accomplish those needs. But instead, apparently, negative campaigning works. If I had been in the legislature for the last 30 years, I would be talking about my record. I would be telling you, try me for 4 more years because I've accomplished X, Y, and Z. Instead, we hear personal attacks against the opponent with no new ideas. I think it's time that we have a debate on the issues. I hope you agree.
Mr. Brown.
You know, as a member of the state legislature, I carried the bill that resulted in the highest increase of school funding in the history of Montana, public school funding, K through 12 funding. I was under my sponsorship that the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights was enacted into law, that the Lakeshore Protection Act was acted into law. I've been involved in a fair number of things that Brian would have no knowledge of, whatever. He's got rhetoric, as we've already talked about. It isn't always consistent. He's got television ads that amount more than anything, I think, to promises and platitudes. But we've got to get down to the specifics if we're going to govern Montana.
That's time,
You can't
Mr.
have
Brown.
it both ways.
Mr. Schweitzer.
I'm tired of all this negative stuff. How about you?
Our next question comes from Dick King, and it goes first to Mr. Schweitzer.
Making a transition here, excuse me. While the state needs to have good economic development programs, economic development happens at the local level. But local economic development capacity is not uniform across the state. What will you do as governor to strengthen, support, and improve local economic development efforts?
As you know, across Montana we have economic development boards, and they're involved with working with their local community to identify those niches in those communities that are most likely to be successful. If, in fact, the only investment occurs in those places in Montana that already have rapidly growing economies, then it's all going to be for naught. We have to make sure that the Baker office remains open and vibrant. We have to make sure that offices across Montana have the resources that they need, because we're a state together. And when we have a portion of the state that is falling behind, and those tax revenues are not following because we're not creating wealth, then it's going to cause more people in the parts of Montana that are growing to pay more taxes. So I think it's incumbent upon state government to give the assistance across Montana. We've identified that north of Billings and east of Great Falls and that whole region out in Montana, we're looking for opportunities. We need economic development folks on the ground in places like Sydney and Glasgow and Glendive and Baker and Havre, on the ground, who understand the local economy and the local players and the local bankers who are most likely to be participators. You can't run economic development from Helena. It needs to be on the ground in every single community, and you can bet, if you'll select me governor, we're going to be listening to the folks in all 56 counties, not just the ones in Lewis and Clark County.
Mr. Brown.
Well, we've got 12 economic regions in our state that we function with economic development boards through. And it's been a good concept, and it's worked well under the leadership of David Gibson, the economic director in the governor's office. And we need to continue that policy. I've heard some suggest that perhaps we need to establish some kind of a governance board to determine policy between his office and the 12 regions, but I think that the existing system works well and that would probably only bureaucratize things. So we're making some progress. One of the things that the economic development regions have gotten together and are interested in is doing a better job of job training. And of course, that's vitally important to Montana and vitally important to the expansion of the economy in our state, regardless of which region. I mean, that could be the case in any part of Montana. And so we need to make a major effort working in the workplace and as well as with our institutions of higher learning to make our job training more relevant to the job sector in Montana. And you know, something pretty exciting that's going on right now today too is this whole shared leadership initiative. The whole idea of working with the business community, the labor community, as well as the higher educational community to build Montana's economy. And it's something that I think has real prospects. And I hate to bring him up, but Jeff Gamble, the Montana State University in Bozeman, who is the leader of the other institution of higher learning, has suggested the I-90 Research Corridor, which would be the corridor that connects the Billings campus, the Bozeman campus, the Butte campus, and the Missoula campus together in a research corridor. It's a neat idea and something we ought to focus on to bring more economic development to Montana.
And that's time. Mr. Schweitzer, 30 seconds.
Once again, you need leadership in Helena that will reach out and work with every single region across Montana. You need leadership that understands the economy in every community, whether it be the oil and gas community of Sydney or whether it be the agricultural community in the Northern Triangle, whether it be the livestock industry in southeast Montana. You need a governor who understands the natural resource industry and understands the world of technology. I will be the first natural resource scientist in some period of time to bring a nexus together of science and agriculture to grow Montana's economy in the natural resource industry and in the technology industry.
That's time. Mr. Brown, 30 seconds.
I can't really elaborate too much more on what I've already said. We're trying to build the economy. I think Brian and I both agree on that. My position to growing the economy might be to be more hesitant to raise taxes, to be more concerned about the regulatory environment than him, but I can't speak for him in that regard. My record speaks for itself. I was served in the state legislature and also as Secretary of State and have a record that demonstrates my political philosophy and my leadership style.
Okay. Our next question, it looks like this will be our last question before closing remarks, comes from Chuck Johnson of the Lee Newspaper State Bureau. It goes first to Mr. Brown.
I'd like to ask each of you a series of statements and to see what your commitment to open government in Montana will be if you're governor. And maybe you could just answer each one separately.
Okay.
All meetings in the governor's office will be open to the public and be posted in advance.
I agree with that absolutely. I supported Governor Roscoe when he implemented that concept.
We're just going to go back and
That'd
forth?
be great.
Likewise.
Advance notice will be given for all meetings outside the Capitol in which the governor is participating.
I think I could agree to that. I'm not sure that would be, there might be situations where that might not be possible, but I certainly would agree with it in principle.
All meetings that the governor is meeting outside the Capitol building. No, if I'm going home and I'm with Nancy, we're not going to invite you, Chuck.
But what you meant, Chuck, was a public meeting of some kind, right?
State government-related meetings.
Yeah.
Okay. I think so. I think that would be appropriate, yes.
Your home phone number will be listed in the telephone directory and Montanans will be able to call you.
Yes?
Always has, always will.
You will see that a 2003 state law is fully implemented. It requires every state and local agency to have policies and procedures in place to assure the public's right to know what government is doing.
Yes. Is it the law, you say?
Yes.
Well, then, of course, yes.
Actually, the Associated Press reminded counties across Montana that it's still the law when they requested information from sheriffs and county attorneys, and a good part of the county said no, they wouldn't give them that information. So absolutely, absolutely we'll do that.
Okay, that was easy. Let's go to the closing remarks. We have another coin flip arranged now to see who gets to decide who goes first and who wraps it up. So, Mr. Brown, you lost the opening flip, so I'm going to ask you to call this coin flip in the air. We're going to see if I can catch it. If you get it right, you get to determine the order. Here we go.
Heads.
It's tails. Mr. Schweitzer, you get to decide you go first or second.
Bob, that's 4 for 4 you've lost on these flips. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for being here, because democracy don't show up. This is a system that's built around those who show up. Thank you for showing up and caring. That's part of my time. I've been to 56 counties. I've been all across Montana listening to folks, and I ask people about state government. I ask them about their opinions. I ask them about ideas of making government more efficient. And I've got notebooks full of ideas. And then I ask them, do you like your legislator? Do you like the person that you've elected and sent to Helena? And almost every time they say, I do. I like my legislator. They're good listeners. They're good leaders. They have big hearts. But they get to Helena and something happens. So then I ask them, do you like the legislature? And no, I can't find many people who say, yeah, the legislature is working in the way it ought to be. People across Montana are tired of all this partisan bickering. So listening to the folks across Montana and knowing we've got to get this economy going, knowing that we've got to invest in education, knowing that we are at the bottom and we can be moving up in terms of wages and technology jobs and natural resource jobs, I've said to the people of Montana, we'll make a deal with you. I'll reach across the aisle. And that's why I picked John Bollinger, our remarkable Republican state senator from Billings, to serve as the next lieutenant governor. Because the next governor and lieutenant governor are going to send a clear signal to every community in Montana that we expect you to tell your legislator to come to Helena and not identify themselves as Republican or Democrat, but identify themselves as Montanans. Come to Helena and do the people's work. Don't do the party's work. John Bollinger and I have built a bridge wide enough, strong enough, and long enough for all of Montana. We can get this state moving again, and with your help, we'll lower the cost of health insurance and prescription drugs. We'll invest in a higher education system that's delivering the kinds of graduates that industry needs in Montana. And most specifically, you will have a government that you can and will be proud of. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the opportunity.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, Brian's made somewhat of an issue today in today's debate about negative campaigning. And, you know, I was back in July, I think about the 13th or 14th of May, when my running mate Dave Lewis and I announced for public office. And the day following, our announcement was greeted by this response from Brian. He said, Brown and his running mate have been two of the most instrumental people in Montana in ruining our economy and our budget. I think they should offer an apology, not an announcement. So that's how I was welcomed into the campaign. So politics ain't beanbag, as someone once said. This is a business where the issues are sharply defined, and there needs to be a difference indicated so people have a basis for making a choice. And if he can't handle the heat, maybe he should get out of the kitchen. I guess it's his choice. You know, we've proposed 13,000 jobs in the most comprehensive job development plan ever proposed, according to Paul Polzin, the economist here, one of the economists here at the University of Montana. And we're proud of that proposal. It's specific and it's concrete. And it looks at the economy in all kinds of different aspects. We're going to expand the economy in the area of tourism. And we understand how by just investing a relatively small amount of money in promoting Montana and other states, we can increase our state's economy significantly. And then in the area of jobs that perhaps pay better and build our economy better, such as perhaps looking at the hydrogen-based economy in the future and the development of coal, we can do important things for Montana in that regard. I've got a good background for this job. I have a reputation for building bridges. My running mate, Dave Lewis, has served in the cabinets of four different governors, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. It's possible to reach out for allies without retreating from principle. I know how to do that. I know how to lead, and I ask you for your support.
Bob Brown, Brian Schweitzer, thank you both for coming today. Thanks to our sponsors, the University of Montana, the University of Montana Alumni Association, the Missoulian, the Montana Economic Development Association, students of Phi Sigma Alpha Honor Society. Election Day is November 2nd. Go and vote. Thanks for coming.